Thank you all for welcoming me here today. I'm going to apologize. I am on West Coast time still, so I'm trying to wake up. But I'm going to try and pick up my energy, and with a crowd like this, how could I not? And a couple coffees. So let's get started. So it is an incredible honor to speak here at the Hoedown today. But it's also a little odd because unlike most of the other speakers who are doing good things for the world with their careers, and promise me now that you won't throw anything at me right now, I am a corporate lawyer. I've worked for blood-sucking banks. I've represented evil companies. And here's the kicker. I've even defended a former CEO of the investment bank, Goldman Sachs. Okay, you can start throwing things at me. I'm just gonna have to take it now. So most people probably see this work and see it as somewhere between evil and boring, right? And it is. I mean, I can say this as a corporate lawyer. It is pretty boring. Except for one little thing. Using the money that I've earned as a corporate lawyer, on weekends and evenings, I've been working with a team of grassroots activists doing something that none of my corporate clients could have imagined. I've been sneaking onto animal farms with a camera in the dead of night and rescuing animals from violence. So I'm here today to talk about the work that my team does, which is called Open Rescue, and about the animal rights network that we created to support it, which we call Direct Action Everywhere, or DxE. But it's always so much easier to show rather than tell. So I'm going to start things off with a video.
She's not doing so well. We're going to try and do the best revenue that we can as soon as possible. There's so much dust and soot that it actually hurts our eyes. So we just found her sprawled out on the ground. She's in really bad shape.
This chicken's beak has been cut here.
Yeah.
The problem with diarrhea like this is you get maggots in 2 or 3 days. I mean, for her to get this thin, she's not been right for at least the last couple of weeks. Her prognosis overall is really, really poor. She is suffering at this point.
Hey, it's Wayne. I'm at the vet and I have kind of an emergency that I need your feedback on. Call me back. When I was growing up in Indiana, I didn't have many human friends. I was in an immigrant family and we were very much disconnected from the people around us. There were very few people of color in central Indiana where I was growing up. So the friends I made were all animals. I would go out into the forest and talk to the squirrels, have conversations with birds, and try to play with reptiles and frogs, and usually they ran away from me. So they didn't like me very much. But I'm lucky enough to have found at least a few animals who do seem to like me. Lisa is my little girl. She's more than happy to chew off my arm if I'm having a bad day. Natalie and Joan are my 2 old ladies. They've been with me for 10 years and love each other as much today as I love them. And I gotta say, in loving animals, I'm not alone. This is an entire nation of animal lovers.
When we look at people with their companion animals, their dogs and cats, they talk about them as if they're their children.
Animals are our friends, they're our family. We're delighted by them. We're even sometimes amazed by them. And I think it's because we love animals that it comes as such a rude shock when we first realize that human beings are doing vicious things to them. Violence against animals is everywhere. Violence is in our clothing, it's in our science, it's in our entertainment, and above all, it's in our food. There's this video footage of a cow on a slaughter line who's anticipating her own death, and you can see her struggling to try and escape. All of us know how it feels to be trapped and scared, and all of us can imagine what it's like to be in that place.
I know that if I were in that position today, And if you were in that position today, we would be asking for help. And the animals are asking for help too. And we need to answer their call.
If corporations are torturing and killing animals everywhere, why doesn't the public know about it? The answer, quite simply, is that these corporations don't want us to know about it. All over the country, corporations are inducing state and municipal governments to pass laws that ban photographing, videotaping, and otherwise revealing the violence that's happening behind closed doors. These companies are more aware of the public scrutiny they're facing, and they're extremely selective in who they employ as a result. They have a particular demographic profile they're looking for. Generally immigrants, generally low-income folks, and generally they have to have some connection to someone who's currently an employee. If you don't have those connections, you're not going to get a job. So a job in a certified humane facility is probably the hardest to get minimum wage job in the country, because they are afraid of activists coming in, offering a window into the world of animal industry. But the most terrifying thing about all this is that they're not just suppressing information about violence. They actually want to twist it into something good.
These companies are actively trying to cultivate and create a culture around the idea of humanely killing animals. Whole Foods, for example, has recently come out with a $20 million ad campaign called Values Matter, where they regularly tout all of the nice ways that they treat their animals. So the thing about this 5-step animal welfare program is that they allow the slicing of birds' beaks in order to stop them from cannibalizing each other in these painful and terrible conditions, the castration of baby pigs so that their meat tastes better after they're slaughtered. And ultimately, they're marketing all of this as humane, which is incredible and really violent, because there's no humane way to castrate someone or slice off their nose and sell their dead body. It's almost as if you can choose how much cruelty you want to inflict upon animals before buying their body. On these farms, many of these animals are left diseased and distressed. And to deal with this so-called problem, Certified Humane has a few methods of recommended euthanasia. Stretching the birds' necks until they snap, shoving them into gas chambers until they suffocate, and repeated electrocution followed by slitting of the throat. There's no way to humanely do any of those things. Whole Foods is taking over America. And Whole Foods is taking over America not just with stores, but also with ideas. With the idea that somehow you can care about animals, but you can kill them too.
Whole Foods is leading the way in building a terrifying new world where killing is an act of compassion. So many companies are following in its footsteps because that's where the money is. But it's a house of lies. We need to challenge those lies with the truth.
Going behind closed doors is the only way to show the world what's actually happening. Whole Foods is selling the public on a fantasy, but the reality is dark and violent.
This is the first investigation documenting what's actually happening inside of a certified humane facility. Now, certified humane is a standard that is better than all of us. It has the full-throated support of the Humane Society of the United States, the ASPCA, and 50 or so other animal groups. This is the best of the best. And of course, Whole Foods sells it. So DxE set out to find out how things look from the inside. The first thing that hits you right across the face is just how congested everything is. Sometimes the hens are just piled on top of each other.
I saw horrid despair. Each of the birds only receives a little more than a square foot of space. They replaced cages of wire with cages of flesh.
You see this little girl, she's lost almost all of her feathers. The stress from just living in these incredibly crowded, filthy conditions causes so many of them to lose all their feathers. Birds were suffering from rashes, inflammation, even self-mutilation. And we were just overwhelmed by the constant cries of distress. This is the face of humane farming right here.
So the first thing that you notice is just the horrible filth and the horrible stench. There's feces everywhere. Many of these animals are covered in feces.
This is not natural for a hen to be covered in feces and unable to do anything about it. She obviously should be able to clean herself, but she's so weak that she literally just has to stand in her own feces.
One of the most horrifying things we saw was birds trapped in a manure pit. We were literally digging them out of their own feces. Disease is everywhere. The birds are so sick, you can hear them struggling to breathe. We would find hens who didn't have the strength to stand on their own 2 legs. With others, we couldn't even tell what was wrong with them. They looked like they had been tortured in a mad scientist lab, and in a sense they have. It's a mad scientist named animal agriculture. Curve with the beak. Almost every animal had their beak chopped off. Many of them were so deformed they hardly looked like birds anymore. In some cases, we found other mutilated body parts, including a dismembered bloody wing. And finally, there was the death toll. Documents in the facility showed that dozens and maybe even hundreds of birds were dying every day.
We're not sure quite what to make of this, but one of them appears to have passed away.
All of these places that we call farms, they're not farms. They're prisons where every single inmate is on death row.
The breathing is labored. It looks like one of her legs is splayed out. We're going to try to do what we can to help this little girl. I don't even know. Touching her is a good idea because it looks like one of her wings is seriously injured. But sometimes the hens will be trapped in their own feces. And that could be what happened to this girl. It's not entirely clear. So we might try and pick her up, but I don't know if there's anything we can do for So we were not planning to do this. We're going to confirm with the other members of the team by walkie-talkie that everyone's okay with possibly just taking this one day out. And we'll just have to figure out what to do with her in the meantime. But she would die if we left her here. So we're going to try and get her some veterinary care.
Go into these type of facilities, it's just overwhelming. It really hits home, you know, that something that images and video can't do, and so it's just the overwhelming stench. I always just feel like this is, you have to live your entire life in this suffocating smell, and this is, you know, on a so-called good farm too, and so you can even imagine what the lives are like, you know, in other facilities.
Looking at this little one's eyes closed, it's really difficult to see that because you can tell she's so scared. She has no idea where she is. Her body is trembling as I'm holding her. She's trying to hide as much as possible, so she's going inside of my elbow just so she could be in a dark place because darkness is what she's used to.
What's your reaction, having kind of just seen what happens inside these facilities, to this marketing that Whole Foods uses that talks about how compassionate they are towards animals?
Yeah, how dare they? Like, blatant lies. I mean, it's the audacity that Whole Foods and other companies like Chipotle have. It just angers you when you look at the victims and you feel them like trembling and shaking while these companies are profiting off of talking about how kind they are to animals. and hear the victims who have to go through and suffer. So how dare they?
Frankly, all of us were pretty sure she was going to die. When we took her to the vet, the first vet said, "This hen has no hope. She's going to pass away within hours, and the best you can do is to euthanize her." We got a second opinion from someone who knows chickens very well, and she told us that this hen has a chance. You just have to fight for her. And so for the next few weeks, we hand-fed her. We gave her fluids almost every day. We had to put an IV into her to get the water that she needed because she couldn't even lift her own head up. She was so weak. We did everything we could, and then all we could do was pray.
So here's Mei. Just a couple weeks later. Look how good she's doing.
Because of what she went through, Mei will always be a little different, slower and weaker than the other hens. She had to relearn how to drink.
They just need to know it's there.
How to eat.
You like your food?
And how to stand and
Make
walk.
sure you're not crap. Oh, look at that. Look at that, pretty girl. She's walking around. Look at that.
But her recovery has been nothing short of extraordinary. And it was a beautiful thing for me to see for the first time Mei walking around outside and looking up into the sky and seeing the sunlight above her head. It was a beautiful thing to see her dust bathing for the first time and seeing her have an opportunity to engage in this natural behavior that had been denied her for the first 2 years of her life.
Oh, look at Mei. Mei got dirt all over her face. She's not very happy.
Mei is the most loving animal I've ever met. She follows you around everywhere and squawks the moment you leave her side. And most hens like to be with their own kind. They'll hang out with the flock. But when you set her down with the flock and you walk away, she'll follow you everywhere.
So it doesn't matter where we go in the yard, Mei pretty much is always going to follow us.
She has made one really good friend. And her really good friend is a rooster named Dave. And Dave is a really small rooster who was getting bullied by the other roosters, so he never really got any companionship. None of the hens would give him any attention because he was a little tiny rooster and was always getting bossed around. But Mei, since she was a different hen and wasn't really getting any attention from the roosters either, Dave decided to bond with her. And so Dave now follows Mei around everywhere. And in exchange, she gives him lots of kisses in the face. And she's got a long and happy life ahead of her. You know, hens can live sometimes up to 15 years. Her life would have been cut short by this company, but she's happy now today, you know, thanks to Whole Foods.
Good job, Mei.
The scary thing, though, is that we had to leave so many others behind. Mei is 1 in a billion. Her sisters and brothers are still trapped, scared, and in pain. Whole Foods is the mastermind behind it all. They say they love animals. They say they're treating animals humanely, but they're lying. They're spreading violence into areas that are new and even bizarre. And we need to inspire people who love animals.
Love is liberation! Love is action!
People believe in doing the right thing to take action against these violent lies.
It's not food, it's violence! It's not food, it's violence!
Animals are not here for us, they're here with us. Just look inside your heart. You already know the right thing to do.
If we believe that what we're doing is the right thing to do, then we should go in proudly and openly with no masks on and rescue these animals from a life of misery and torment. Animal rights is the next frontier of social justice. Activists risked their lives for the abolition of human slavery. They made grave sacrifices so I, as a woman, would have the right to vote. And to this day, they're fighting for the right of immigrants like me to be seen as more than just a missing passport. We need to have the same courage for animal rights if we want our dream of a better world to come true.
And that is exactly what we are doing with Direct Action Everywhere. Across nations and continents, from all cultures and creeds, we are taking nonviolent direct action to the streets into the stores, and yes, into the very places where animals are being killed. Our Open Rescue Network empowers activists to expose and stop the violence behind closed doors. Our international campaigns are building a true social movement for animals, inspiring all of us to speak strongly for equality among all animals. And together, we will achieve our dreams. We will fight until every animal is free.
I haven't actually seen that footage in quite some time, and it's bittersweet for me because Mei passed away recently, so I apologize if I get a little emotional during this talk. And like so many hens, even though she had a much longer life than she would have received on a farm, her body broke down from the deterioration and torment she had endured for the first 2 years of her life. So I can tell you more about Mei later if you ask me, but it's been hard the past couple of weeks. So the rescue of Mei triggered an incredible reaction. The New York Times, Mother Jones, and 50 other media outlets covered the rescue. Whole Foods was forced into a stumbling response, admitting that the farm at issue had not even been audited despite being certified as humane. Most importantly, from our perspective, the rescue mobilized activists across the world. There were over 70 cities in 20 different countries that joined our campaign in the month of January alone. And it happened because a volunteer team with no money, no history, and no famous names decided to go behind closed doors. Sorry. But for all the energy and attention that this rescue received, it's important to know that Whole Foods is just one company in a world that is sadly filled with violence. So I want us all to take a step back and ask how Open Rescue fits into the broader puzzle of animal exploitation. And it turns out the problem of animal exploitation has very, very deep roots. Let me explain. Extreme animal cruelty, it turns out, has sadly been a part of human history from the beginning. Our pre-modern ancestors wiped out species across the planet, including the saber-toothed cat, the giant sloth, and the majestic woolly mammoth. Fast forward a few thousand years to the height of Western civilization, Rome. But the civilization that some see as a glorious example of progress was in fact filled with animal cruelty. Exotic animals from all corners of the planet were shipped into the Colosseum, where they were forced to fight each other to the death. Sorry, everyone, technical issues. Okay. But perhaps the most graphic example of cruelty that I've found in my studies is from 16th century France and the practice of cat burning. Hundreds of people would gather on the streets of Paris. They would light a huge and raging bonfire, and then they would take cats, no different than the cats that we have in our own homes, put them in cages and bags, and lower them one by one into the fire. The cats would scream out in fear. They would shriek in agony. Their bodies would be burned and then carbonized. And the entire time, the people of Paris would laugh and demand more. Fast forward 500 years, and in so many ways, we have a completely different story. 62% of American households have a companion animal, no different than the cats that were burned in 16th century France, in our own homes. And half of these households buy their animals Christmas or birthday presents. Collectively, we spend nearly $50 billion with a B on caring for animals, which is nearly as much as we spend on caring for the human poor in this country. So you see numbers like this and you tell yourself, wow, things are great for animals, right? We love animals. We love and treat animals with so much more respect than our ancestors in 16th century France. Well, all of you already know that's wrong, because there's one glaring and brutal exception to the general evolution of humankind towards greater compassion for animals, and that is animals used for food. Billions of animals endure suffering that rivals the most horrible things that humankind has ever done to anyone. There's so many examples, including this crate, but the one that has always hit hardest to me is what Bob Comus, a former pig farmer himself, has called the last pig problem. Because you see, no matter how supposedly compassionate the farm, no matter how supposedly humane the slaughter, there is always a last pig in the slaughter line. And pigs, like all social animals, depend on one another in times of fear. When there's only one pig left, when all of her friends have been taken away, she goes absolutely insane. She shrieks in fear. She climbs desperately over the cages, over the crates, over the walls, and she even mutilates herself because she knows that she will have to face a terrifying and violent end, and she will have to face it alone. With examples like this, it seems that in both the scale and the intensity of suffering, we in modern America make 16th century France look pretty good. But how do we reconcile this with the growing love for animals, the fact that we all say that we care for the dogs and cats in our own homes, and we care for animals more broadly too? Well, the key insight is that social change and culture isn't just driven by individual choices and reasons, but by systemic forces and social forces. Human beings engage in all manner of seemingly bizarre and inconsistent conduct because institutions around us tell us to do so. We can be induced by institutions to disbelieve our own eyes, to fall in love with the most terrible music in the world. Does anyone actually like Taylor Swift? No, right? But we can even be induced to commit the most horribly violent acts, all through the power of social institutions. And what is an institution? Well, social scientists describe institutions as rules, spoken or unspoken, under which human beings interact with one another. There are legal institutions, such as constitutions and contracts, economic institutions, such as the market economy, and perhaps most importantly for our purposes, there are moral institutions, such as, quote-unquote, speciesism, the unspoken ideology that arbitrarily privileges human interests over those of other animals. Even the greatest economists of our day, including my former teacher, Robert Fogel, have noted the power of moral institutions to shape and reshape human civilization. These legal, economic, and moral forces shape our individual choices in ways that we don't even recognize. The problem is that animal industry does recognize this, and they have warped our institutions in three ways that I call the 3 C's of evil: concealment, control, and complacency. First, recognizing the growing empathy that we all have for animals, industry has concealed the horrors that happen behind closed doors of laws, such as the Ag-Gag laws and the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. Second, because they conceal the truth, they also control the stories that are told from the farm and the slaughterhouse. Powerful narratives such as, quote-unquote, values matter and food with integrity depict green pastures and grassy fields with happy animals. Third, because they conceal the horrors and control the stories, they have induced, even in those of us who profoundly love animals, a complacency about what is happening. We are deceived by corporate propaganda, and there are hordes of us who think of ourselves as animal lovers, who nonetheless go out and buy things like humane meat. What do we do about this? Well, across the world, activists have challenged concealment, control, and complacency with a powerful tactic called open rescue. Started in Australia in the 1980s, the idea was simple. we as ordinary people can overcome concealment by openly walking into animal farms and documenting the conditions within. We can overcome control by rescuing victims of violence and telling the true and dark story of animal industry. And we can overcome complacency by inspiring ordinary people to take action for animals with moving narratives of individuals rescued from a living nightmare. The initial open rescues in Australia have now spread across the globe and inspired some of the most important campaigns in the history of animal rights. Some examples. The Humane Society Farm Animal Team. Many of us probably see the Humane Society as a moderate force in this movement. But in fact, the leaders of this team first earned public attention to the plight of animals in farms by doing open rescues 15 years ago. A small and young group of grassroots activists, including my good friend Paul Shapiro, pictured here, garnered national media attention by exposing the plight of hens in egg farms. Animal Equality, one of the most powerful and successful platforms for animal rights in Europe. Again, they first started out as grassroots activists doing open rescues, where they would find the bodies of tortured animals, bring them out to the public, and show the world the truth of animal agriculture. And perhaps most inspiring to all of us here, Farm Sanctuary, which was born Farm Sanctuary was born when a young activist named Jean rescued a little sheep named Hilda from the dead pile of a Lancaster stockyard. And with that one daring act, he started a movement to give the most abused beings on this planet sanctuary from violence. Open rescue. Open rescue, in short, has been instrumental to the growth of the animal rights movement. But a strange thing happened. Around 10 years ago, open rescue in the United States almost completely stopped. Now, I've spoken to almost all the key players in the open rescue movement. Many of them are close friends of mine. And there are three principal reasons open rescue stopped. The first was fear. 10 years ago, Adam Durand, an open rescue activist in upstate New York with no criminal history, was shockingly charged with multiple felonies for rescuing a few distressed hens from an egg farm. While he was only sentenced to 3 months in prison, this sent a chill through the entire open rescue movement. The second reason is professionalization. Partly as a result of this fear, many young grassroots activists moved to nonprofit organizations with larger budgets and legal teams. They also shifted away from open rescue to the undercover investigation model, where full-time employed activists obtained employment at these farms and used concealed cameras to expose the truth. While undercover investigations are legally safer and have been incredibly successful, they are literally thousands of times more expensive than open rescues, meaning that they're out of reach for all but the wealthiest animal rights groups. The third reason open rescue stopped is weak messaging. Simultaneous to the shift towards nonprofits and away from grassroots activism was a shift in messaging. After all, large nonprofit organizations needed to appeal to a broader fundraising base. The messaging used, therefore, was diluted: bigger cages and better deaths, rather than animal liberation. Well, this was great for building a large nonprofit sector. It was terrible for sustaining tactics like open rescue. The most passionate and committed activists in this world wanted to see animals rescued, not placed in bigger cages. And so open rescue, like so much grassroots activism in the mid-2000s, died off. At DxE, we are trying to revitalize this powerful tactic with a network of volunteer, grassroots investigators who can overcome fear, professionalization, and weak messaging with support, community, and culture. Fear can be overcome with social support that provides activists with the encouragement, training, and yes, pro bono legal representation to minimize the risk of prosecution. Professionalization can be overcome by creating a true grassroots community where not just professionals, but anyone with big heart and a smartphone has the power to become a whistleblower for animal rights. Third and finally, weak messaging can be overcome by creating a culture of inspiration, encouragement, and action that asks for not just bigger cages, but true sanctuary for all the victims of violence. In all of these ways, our program for Open Rescue is different from what came before, because we are not just isolated, dispersed investigators. We are an empowered grassroots network. Now, this is fundamentally different than the model that's traditionally used in animal advocacy, which I think looks something like this. So how many of you know this feeling? Raise your hands. Almost all of us who are animal advocates have had the experience of being a lonely vegetarian or vegan. We're mocked by the people around us, even the people who love us most. We're probably embarrassed to even bring up the issue of animal rights. But in so many ways, this is the best case scenario for modern animal advocacy. We use impersonal methods of outreach, like leaflets, billboards, or videos, to change people's individual diets rather than empower them to become a part of an activist community. Indeed, this was even the goal of most open rescues historically. They get massive amounts of attention, generate incredible public dialogue, but the message was always, go vegan as an individual, not get embedded in an activist community. But we know through social science that relapse rates for veganism are astonishingly high. A recent study found that a shocking 60%, that's 60, not 16, but 60% of people who self-identify as vegetarian are eating animals again within a week, just a week. These vegetarians and vegans aren't even able to sustain their diets, much less take collective action to change our broader institutions. The net result is that all the energy and attention that we generate with our activism is wasted away. At DxE, we offer a different model based on the history and practice of social change. Our simple formula is this: create, connect, and inspire. We create activists, not just passive vegans. We connect those activists into networks and communities, and we inspire those networks and communities to take nonviolent, direct action for animal rights. Open Rescue is perfectly situated to accomplish all of these three objectives. It motivates even ordinary people to take inspiring action for animals. It connects those ordinary people around a common target and story, and it inspires all of us to make greater commitment, sacrifice, and yes, even risk to fight for those we love most. The theory behind this is quite simple, that when it comes to social change, empowered networks, not lonely vegans, are what matter. The sociologist Duncan Watts, who I actually just met with a couple days ago, compares social change to a forest fire. And if you want to understand forest fires, you don't just look to the qualities of the individual sparks or the attributes of individual trees. No. If you want to understand forest fires, you have to look to the structure of the entire ecosystem, and in particular, dense clusters of highly flammable underbrush connected up with other dense clusters of highly flammable underbrush. If the kindling is dense enough and flammable enough, then any spark in any tree can cause a raging blaze. Similarly, if you want to understand what causes social change, you don't just have to look at individual behavior and psychology. It's the power of networks, clusters of highly motivated activists that drive us toward real, sustainable, and permanent change. Empowered networks have inspired some of the most incredible movements in history: the Civil Rights Movement, the Arab Spring, and gay rights. And the reason for this is quite simple. Empowered networks of nonviolent direct action work. Social movement scholars talk about three different types of activism. There's contained activism, working within the system to try and change people, even legislators, one by one with tactics such as lobbying or education. And while this activism is absolutely vital, the problem is that no one pays any attention. Second, there's violence. And while violence gets plenty of attention, you lose the moral high ground. Third and finally, there's the sweet spot, networks of nonviolent direct action, which have been described by political scientists as, quote, the strongest weapon of social movements. Because one, they generate attention. Two, they broaden the circle of debate. And three, they inspire action. In fact, political scientist Erica Chenoweth has what she calls the rule of 3.5%. Chenoweth has studied hundreds of movements through history, and what she has found is that when it comes to nonviolent direct action, you don't need a majority of people supporting you. You don't even need a large minority. All you need is 3.5% of the population inspired to take sustained and nonviolent direct action, and you win. Every single time in history, you win. And when I say things like this, people often respond, well, okay, it may have worked for Gandhi. It may have worked for King. But those were people, fighting for people. And we're talking about animals here. Different issue, different tactics. The critics say that animal rights is different. Animal rights is too tough. Animal rights is too hard. Well, I'm here today to say to the critics, you are wrong. But you don't have to listen to me. Let's just look at some numbers. A Gallup poll was released just a few weeks ago showing that 32% of the people in this country believe that animals should have, quote, the same rights as people. The same rights as people. Now, it's important to note that historically, this is massive. In fact, this is 10% more than the number of people who believed in gay rights 20 years ago. And look at where we are today. This is 25% more than the number of people who believed in racial equality in 1958, where someone like myself wasn't even allowed into this country. And what this means is that if we only need to achieve 3.5% of the population and sustain nonviolent direct action, we only need to motivate 1 out of 10 of the people in this country who already agree with us about animal rights to get active for animals, and we will guarantee, absolutely guarantee, that this movement will succeed. So when people say the world will never change, they're just suffering from a fallacy that one famous Harvard psychologist calls the end of history fallacy, because history never ends. It grows, it evolves, and it changes as the world opens its eyes to new ways of thinking. And that brings me to my last point. If you don't believe, after all this, that a mass movement of open rescue, of nonviolent direct action is possible, then I am going to prove you wrong. Because it is already happening. From China, where I met with kids in Beijing just last month who are blocking dog slaughterhouse trucks in the streets and rescuing thousands of puppies from a life of living hell, to Turkey, where our friends in Istanbul are streaming into grocery stores and restaurants, and yes, into slaughterhouses with a message of animal rights. And yes, to this very gathering today, where we have a few hundred people fiercely committed to the idea that every animal on this planet, human or non-human, has the right to be safe and happy and free. All we have to do is look around us, and we will see that nonviolent direct action for animals is already everywhere. And with direct action, we will change the world. And I'm going to show you how.
It's hidden in the dark, where no one will ever see. They're taken when they're just kids. They'll never see their mothers again. They will live in fear of violence. They will live in desperation and pain. It's the largest genocide in history. And it's happening right under our nose. But we are opening our eyes. We see their fear and their pain. We will never forget.
remember their stolen lives. And we will light the path to liberation. They place animals in cages or chains, wherever they take their families or their freedom, wherever they spread violence or death, we will rise up. We will fight for what's right. We will fight for those who've been forgotten. We will fight for those who've been silenced. And we will never give up. Because for them, we must win. And for them, we will win. Because the world is changing. Numbers grow every day. We have wiped away our tears, fought off our fears, found our voice, found our strength. We are ready to act, to end this atrocity, to build a better world, to light the path forward. The path to liberation.
Thank you. So my time is up, so I just want to leave you with 10 words. 10 words that I think can change the world. And here they are. Find your voice, find some friends, and fight like hell. Thank you very much.